Yeah. Anyone wants to or not?
Namaste. Could you please summarize it so it will be nice to understand what will be going on.
Yeah, so last week, as you remember, we had very basic understanding, presentation on the very basic understanding of diaspora and migration. And we also try to understand the differences between the diaspora and migration, different flows of migration diaspora, and the concepts and very basic theories also. So based on that, now we'll go on the larger theme of transnationalism and globalization. I hope that you managed to understand what is diaspora and migration, because these two concepts that we are going to touch upon today, transnationalism and globalization, they are also to an extent or to a larger extent related to both migration and diaspora. So let's yeah, let's go on to the uh, basic or the very simple understanding of migration, of the transnationalism. Within that, of course, migration flows and also globalization. Within this 1 hour or so, we'll try to become familiar with the concepts of these two uh, isms like transnational globalization, and also we'll try to understand their application and impact on the society, their pros and cons also, and we also will try to understand the relationship between these two concepts in reality for the society. As you may already guess, globalization and diaspora, they both impact just a second. Yeah, they both impact various aspects of our life, and they also, like, the word transnationalism itself, if we take the parts of the word, then we can already understand that transnationalism, it's like transcending. It is transcending the boundaries, national boundaries, and it's also trying to form multiple ties between people, societies, as well as various institutions which are crossing the borders of the state or the nation state. On the other hand, globalization also, when we take the globalization as such, it is like the development of the integrated global order. And that overrides the local and the national. But let's see deeply what transnationalism is, like in scholarly literature, what it means and what scholars denote by transnationalism. So just like I mentioned 1 minute ago, transnationalism is transcending the boundaries, national boundaries, nation-state boundaries, and it gives fresh perspective to cultural institutions and identities, economic institutions, political institutions as well. And this idea was first brought into the scholarly literature by American scholars after and during the World War I. These American scholars, they were supporting the idea of cosmopolitanism, rather giving rise to a debate related to transnational connections of people who carry their cultures at the time of migration. They were also this kind of understanding of transnationalism later shaped few postmodern ideas like cosmopolitanism and multiculturalism. But at present, I must say that when we are talking about transnationalism, we basically refer to few types of transnationalism, or a few denominations of transnationalism, like the economic one. Then another level is the international organizations. And while talking about transnationalism, of course, we are talking about the terrorism also, like terrorist groups as well, and of course diaspora as well, like I mentioned in the last time. And of course, we must note that transnationalism is very much closely related to globalization when we are talking about communication, technology, transportation, and of course the demographic imbalance in various societies, in various parts of the world. Now, sometimes when talking about transnationalism, like we talk about one which is above and the one which is from below. Like I mentioned, the transnational organizations, while talking about transnational organizations within the concept or the idea of transnationalism, that is to an extent transnationalism from above, that is leading to the creation of transnational communities. And this is more like supranational political, that is above the national or above the nation state. These are mostly also like economic bodies. And the transnationalism from below, while talking about this, we mean the various migration flows, and this is mostly created, or let's say it comes forward by various migration flows and migrant workers also, like I was listening to your other presentation when you were talking about the labor and migrants. So this plays a big role in the formation of transnationalism from below. And the experiences of migrant workers also play a big role in this. And in this relation, I just have to, last time you were asking about references, about articles. I thought that this would be a good reference for you people if you are mostly interested in the differences or the formation of diaspora communities and diasporic societies, let's say in various host societies. Then these two books, they can be a good reference for you to look into. I myself would suggest you to have a look on these two. And generally talking about transnationalism, that also brings us to the theories of transnationalism. Then the most widely used theory of transnationalism is the post-nationalist theory, or the one which is suggested by some scholars, just like the well-known Indian scholar Arjuna Padurai. He thinks that transnationalism is a translocality, and translocality, by him, he presents it as the idea wherein the idea of the nation state is displaced by the exclusive mediator of connectivity across and also between disparate political communities. But after all, we should agree that despite all this, that nation state and the state plays a big role, but after all it has a role, and it stays and it continues to have a focal point for the transnational movements or transnationalism. But they are of course not the only actors in this entire process. And of course another transnationalism also has a major implications for the transnational connectivity, which is operating through modern technology and cyberspace nowadays, basically the internet. And this is another implication, which plays a big role in transmitting all these spaces, national and nation state boundaries, and it permits to the local also in this case. And another, I would like to just read it out for you. This Swedish anthropologist, Ulf Hanners, well-known anthropologist, who, while talking about transnationalism, he mostly focuses on the transnational forms of life. And he explains that the everyday experience of being Nigerian in a Delta village is constructed in good measure through diasporic connections to London that mediate receptions of popular culture and define the parameters of locality across enormous distances. This is a good example of transnationalism, how you belong to one locality while you are being located in another, let's say in some other locality, while you are bearing your own identity. And this is a good example for you to look into. And it can also happen within the not only like this, but it can, yeah, this is the good way of looking into different ways of how transnationalism can be implied and how it is practiced in general. And by looking at transnationalism and of course, drawing from the last slide, we can figure out the types of transnationalism. And of course, I mentioned just a few minutes back that transnationalism is like across all life spheres. We can see how transnationalism is practiced and how it can permeate all the levels of our life, social, political, economic life. And based on that, we can also like this different various types of transnationalism can be defined in the based on that, like the political one, social one, cultural, and this is not limited only to these spheres. Of course, we can bring up other types of transnationalism depending on which sphere of life it is practiced. And of course, I would like to mention this Benedict Anderson for the political one. He mentions about the long distance nationalism. Of course, this is a complicated notion of looking into transnationalism from this angle. Mostly he is talking about the diaspora formations, diasporic social formations when talking about the long distance nationalism. In this case, it's like he refers to that, of course, mostly. But long distance nationalism, if you, of course, want to like indulge more in this topic, I would just say it in a few words that he means that while being in a different location or while being a citizen of, while holding citizenship of one country, but at the same time you are at the same at some other location, you are working for the for your own homeland, let's say home country, through various activities. It can be capital, it can be economic capital, of course cultural capital, political as well. And through these various means, you are trying to assist your home country. And this is called the long distance nationalism. And just like in a simple ways, I put it in a simple way. And of course, while talking about transnationalism, we should think that it is we are not referring to it as a rupture between here and there, like I mentioned here, because transnationalism, after all, it is also connecting here and there. And this is the basic difference of transnationalism with other forms of, let's say, global flows. And it should also be treated as not only as a social formation, as I mentioned here, but it is also political, cultural, and various scholars, depending on which field they belong to, they look at transnationalism from their angle of research. Let's say, like political scientists look at it as a political formation. Economists, they think that it is the impact on the capitalist globalization. And of course, like I mentioned before, now while talking about transnational formations or transnationalism, we should also take into consideration terrorist groups, criminal networks. They are also another type of transnationalism. And if you go back to the, I mentioned the books for your reference. In one of them, they are also mentioning like the um, gender or yeah, I guess they are like the various types of uh, gender societies or communities. Those are also like transnational formations, and they are also like manifestation of transnationalism. And interestingly, like I hope you had some while talking about this transnationalism. I hope you got some idea what transnationalism is, because when we go to the manifestation of globalization and how it is practiced and how it is understood by scholars and in general in academia, I hope you will understand the differences, and you will see that when we are talking about transnationalism, I mentioned that it is not the rupture between here and there, but mostly transnationalism. It tries to connect what exists, and it is the connection between here and there rather than the rupture between here and there. And now let's go. I would like to see if you have any questions, if you didn't understand anything, or maybe I did not give you a proper understanding of what you were expecting. Maybe you can ask some questions if you want to, or if not, then we can go to the understanding of globalization. Okay, then we'll pass on to the globalization. Um, oh, here. So, for the globalization, I tried to this make some notes for you from the internet. What in Google, let's say, what it is mentioned for in various vocabularies, like in the. Can you read this? The first one. Is it readable for you? I'm not sure.
It
Hello.
is, yeah.
Yeah. So in the Cambridge vocabulary, the definition of globalization is given as such: the increase of trade around the world, especially by large companies producing and trading goods in many different countries. There is another definition, I'll not go to that. And then the Webster Dictionary gives the definition of globalization as the act or process of globalizing, the state of being globalized, especially the development of an increasingly integrated global economy marked especially by free trade, free flow of capital, and the tapping of cheaper foreign labor markets. So, as you can see in both definitions, the aspect that they are focusing on is the economic globalization, is the economy part that they are focusing on. And in the 1990s, the widely known definition of globalization was given by Giddens, and he was identifying globalization or giving the definition of globalization in this way, that it is the intensification of worldwide social relations that link distant localities in a way that local happenings are shaped by events occurring many miles away and vice versa. You can see that Giddens is giving more or less like a political, cultural, social definition to the globalization. So in this way, we can also understand that there are no limited definitions for globalization as such, or it can also depend on what you are looking at within the globalization or within this formation. Saying this, the three historical points. Um, it, there were three historical points, main historical points, where uh, the globalization was formed. I mean, the first one was the first historical period was the integration of Asia, like 1000 AD. The next one was 1500, and then 1800, the Industrial Revolution. This was the big juncture, and the third historical point. And according to Frank, there was a single global world economy with a worldwide division of labor and multilateral trade from 1500 AD onward. But then other scholars argue that there was no, as such, the globalization started much before this, when the networks reached almost all regions of Eurasia and Sub-Saharan Africa region, and the commerce encouraged specialization of agricultural and industrial production. So there are different ideas on what can be considered as the focal historical point for the formation of globalization, or for emerging global forms. But based on this, we also the scholars also have three main positions on globalization. Like, there are scholars who support globalization. In academia, there are also scholars who are completely denying globalization, and there are also transformationalists who are just taking the middle path. Hyper-globalists, as mentioned here, they are supporting globalization, of course, like I mentioned, and they find that globalization, it is as a historic set of economic, cultural, political changes, and they have happened due to technological changes. And this globalization intensified, as per these scholars, after the 1980s. And they believe that the major impact has been made by the advancement in the information and communication due to the digital revolution, which has helped creating a global economy and market. But I would also like the economy part, but from the political or cultural point of view, hyper-globalists think that nation states, they have become very less important, and they present situation of this kind of globalization as a borderless world. So they think about globalization in this way. But the skeptics, it's not that they deny the globalization to an extent. Of course, they are denying, but they think that it doesn't exist as such, world economy. There is no world economy as such, and they believe that there is still trade that's happening within the nation state boundaries. And okay, just sorry. Yeah. And the transformationalists, they are taking just the middle part. They believe that there was a time, historical time, where the globalization started, and they also believe that nation states still play a big role, but they are just taking the middle part. They believe that the idea of globalization is still they still believe that the idea of globalization has to have like some major changes to achieve what the hyperglobalists were talking about. And yeah, so the theories of globalization based on the positions of globalization. Of course, there can be many, but the main major theories, widely known theories on globalization, are divided in realism, liberalism, and critical theory. In realism, or within the theory of realism, they believe that globalization is the creation of the dominant states for the underdeveloped or developing states to further develop and to gain their dominance. On the contrary, liberals, they have a positive view of globalization. Like, you may guess that they believe that globalization is the main way for competitiveness, for economic, like mostly for the economic purposes, and it can help to maximize the utilization of resources, productivity, and like liberals think this way. But the critical theory, they are mostly thinking that uh, they have the oppositional behavior, of what globalization is, and they think that globalization has already created a hierarchical order with a huge disparity between the rich and the poor, and among small and bigger countries. I would not go to this. I will just pass on these types of globalization, because we have already in between we have taught that there can be different on how the scholars look on the globalization. It differs, and also the types of globalization differ, like the economic, cultural, political, and you can talk about the other types of globalization. But in this whole entire process of globalization, of course, we can talk about there can be many pros and cons of globalization. Maybe you can think about more of cons or pros of what globalization is. But like I mentioned, like liberals were talking about the economic aspect of globalization, about the competitiveness, about the other pros of globalization. Low prices are also included there, and the access for improved product, easy access, of course. When talking about the cultural one, we should also mention about the easy access to world cultural works. But of course, all these pro points, they have also their cons. Like, for example, in the economic one, we may talk about how this competitiveness can affect the smaller nations. For some small nations, it can be difficult to compete. Or when we were talking about the multinational organizations, in some cases, multinational organizations can influence the local governments also. And the same goes for the cultural, political fields or areas of globalization. On the other hand, we are talking about easy access to world values. But on the other hand, of course, this cultural globalization brings to cultural homogenization and cultural imperialism, cultural colonialism, and of course, in many cases, some violent ideas may also spread quickly due to globalization. And the same goes for the political one as well. On one hand, we can talk about the opportunities for smaller nations within the globalized world. But on the other hand, of course, the governmental sovereignty may erode. And this can lead to the large nations influencing smaller nations while taking their decisions. And I hope it was you got some ideas, but in the end, I would first like to ask you whether you have any ideas of what is the good aspects of globalization and of course the negative aspects of globalization. If you have any more ideas, you can share, or if you have questions. Okay, then let's see. In the end, we talked about transnationalism, we talked about globalization, but after all, what is that focal point, or where these two concepts and two ideas can converge or diverge? Transnationalism, like you see here, it is challenging homogenization. Like we were talking about globalization, and I said that globalization, one of the negative aspects of globalization is homogenization, like, for example, in the cultural aspect, in the cultural field. And in this sense, transnationalism is challenging this. It is rather trying to connect heterogeneity, and it discouraging homogeneity. But on the other hand, without transnationalism, globalization cannot be, let's say, practiced. It is transnationalism is the main vehicle. They are, so we can understand these two concepts of globalization and transnationalism are very much closely related to each other, but at the same time they are different also. In this modern world also, it is marked by these two processes which are mutually influencing each other, and they are also impacting every aspect of the global system. But we should say that there are also some points where they diverge, or there are points of their departure, and mostly in globalization literature, transnationalism, it is referred to as an umbrella concept that is encompassing a wide variety of transformative processes. And not only like processes, but also developments, and it can take place simultaneously at a local level as well as global one. And for summing up, I would like just to say that these two terms, they are linking people, communities, institutions across border and nation states. And of course, globalization emphasizes on global against the national or the local. That means it is like the rupture, to an extent, not always, of course, but to an extent it is like, if you remember the initial slides where I talked about the rupture between here and there, it is to an extent against the national or the local. But the concept of transnationalism tries to remove the barriers of connectivity, and it brings to the integration rather than homogenization of institutions, economies, policies, etc. Maybe that's it. If you want to have further discussion, or if you want to ask something, you are welcome. Hello.
Ma'am, may I speak? Hello?
Yes. Yeah. Hello.
I- Isn't it uh, natural that this global process of globalization will lead to universalization of culture?
Uh, Universalization, you mean homogenization, or you mean universalization in a good way? Because these are two different things. If we are talking about homogenization, to an extent, it is leading to that when we are talking about the transnational communities as well. But if you are talking about universalization, then I don't think that universalization is uh, to an extent it's a negative form of manifestation, because universal means that it's a universal value, let's say like that. Something is a universal culture, so it's not as bad as homogenization. These two are different. If you, what do you mean? That's my question. If you mean,
I, I mean, yes, homogenization is uh, part of globalization, wherein people from one community go to another community and then homogenize themselves with that community. But by universalization, I mean the universalization of cultures, languages, other things, which will be impacted through the process of globalization. So we may ultimately say, I hope, I suppose you and me, we are not actually English speaking people, but
of course,
we have learned English because of the cultural impact which we had due to colonialism, colonization of India. So further and further, it may lead to universalization of culture, wherein we have a universal culture from for every nook and corner of the this globe.
uh yeah, like I mentioned, like, see, maybe you are talking about homogenization. I would agree with you that if it's a homogenization, yes, then it's not uh it's the one of the cons that I mentioned for the globalization. But if you are talking about universalization, uh, is it a negative thing when we are talking that Indian, for example, some aspect of Indian culture becomes universal? For example, yoga. Nowadays, it's a universal.
Well,
Well, yeah.
it is not a two-way stream. It is only one way. We accept. We accept it from dominant cultures.
Mm. Yeah, if there is a
As
like,
I told you, we are speaking in English because this was a language of the rulers.
yeah, you are right. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, that's true. But it's also one of the means of communication. In this case, it is like not universalizing, but it is also connecting in this case.
Okay, thank you. This is a debate. Thank you. Thank you for your response.
Hello,
Hello.
hello. I have a question.
Yeah.
Now, globalization in the context of globalization, can we can we equal term network society manual cells to
I'm not.
which is cells
Oh,
labor is individualized. Now, in the context of migration studies,
can you
it
please
might
type your
be a
question?
good point. Is the condition of migrants in the context of network society where capital is becoming more and more and more predominant, the conditions of the migrants are becoming more and more precarious? It's my question. Those globalization and special.
Hello. Hello. Maybe he had some internet connection issue. I don't know.
It's probably is democracy is also making the migrant labor laborers.
Can you please type your question?
Deb, your internet is unstable. Please type your question.
Yeah, and I'm not able to see him in the list. See, there are complexities when we are talking about transnationalism and globalization. For transnationalism, when the identity issues are coming forward, when the citizenship of the of any migrant comes forward, then the more complexities also are brought up. Like, for example, you in the previous slides, when I showed to you that someone is sitting in some locality, but he belongs to some other culture, his identity is different. But imagine he is a citizen of another, to a third or fourth country. Then in that case, many other issues are coming forward, because as a citizen, he has an obligation. He has a responsibility, like political responsibility towards, and of course, economic responsibility towards where he belongs to. And but culturally, he is integrated to, not integrated, because this brings problems for integration. When he belongs, citizenship is for someone, for some other country, and he's culturally identifying himself someone else, then in this case, being to another third country or fourth country, it brings issues for his integration also within the host country. So these are the one of the issues, also complex issues for the transnational and global movements. While you are having political responsibility, obligation, and political belonging, you are politically, economically belonging to some other nation or nation state, but socially and culturally, you are identifying yourself someone else. Then you are not, there is a difficulty for oneself to be integrated and to further identify himself. These are one of the complexities. And it's also not for only, of course, diaspora as part of transnational movement. This is a big issue for diaspora studies also. Until now, this is a major research issue for scholars to look into. Yes.
Yeah, hi, Miss.
Hello.
So I know the conversation has gone ahead, but I'm still a little bit confused about the difference between transnationalism and globalism, because it seems to be a lot of the same things. So, but then there was this one line I remember, something like transnationalism is a vehicle for
Yeah.
globalization. So, what does that mean?
What I mean is that if there are no transnational, if there is no transcending, the word itself says that transnationalism is transcending, transcending the border, national border, nation state border. If there is no transcending, that cannot bring to the globalization. If you are not transcending something, then how can you be globalized, for example? But this transcending doesn't only mean the uh, mm, the geographic location. You can also transcend the national, your national or your own, by sitting at home as well. Like I mentioned, the cyberspace, the new emerging technological developments. Through that also you can transcend what you are now, transcending your own, and then you become globalized. And that can happen on different levels, of course. They can happen on the economic level, on political, on cultural. But on the other hand, transnational, they are, that is vehicle. I mean, when you are transcending something, then only you become globalized. This is the main point that scholars want to bring. But at the same time, globalization, to an extent, it's like it is a tendency to to subject the local or the national vis-a-vis the global, the international. While the transnationalism is not bringing or is not subjectifying what is existing. It is trying to rather connect through that. Like, for example, I talked about the best example is, for example, the criminal networks, like I talked. So criminal networks, it's not necessarily to belong to one nation state or to one country or to one cultural community. You can be part of that community by belonging to various cultural groups, various national communities, or whatever. So these are the differences, but they are connecting. Transnational communities, they are rather trying to connect. They are not trying to oblige you for something. But on the other hand, globalization is trying to dominate. There is a domination of the international on on the local or the national. These are the things. But generally speaking, yeah, there is a slight. They are more or less similar. They have more or less similar manifestations. But there is a slight difference also when talking about connecting or putting the barrier or putting the accent on the dominance of something, of the local, of the global on the local. Like transnational, they are both processes, of course. Transnationalism is also a process. Globalization is also a process. But transnationalism brings to globalization, or it cannot. It's not necessary to bring for globalization. There is always transnationalism. When you move from one place to another, when you look at some article on some other political or cultural event that's happening on the other side of the world, That's also like a process of being transnational. These are like small events that are also like part of this transnational, but it's not necessary that you are globalized while reading this article or news or I don't know, getting acquainted to something which is happening on the other side of the world.
Okay, I think I got it. So, like, if there is like a multinational company that is
Mm-hmm.
based in India, so now it opens up a new office in let's say UK, the UK. So, is that an example of transnationalism but not globalization? Even though they might be operating in the UK and India as well. Would that
I would say that it's part of like globalization process because you are opening a multinational company. We are talking about something which is part of the economic aspect, right? So
yeah.
it's like a multinational company which is operating in some other country, let's say in XYZ, I don't know. And then in this case, what are the manifestations of globalization? When there is a dominance of the supranational, let's say. This is also supranational or above nation operation. This is the application of globalization on that level, which is happening from like of course from in the case of transnationalism also there is a manifestation which happens on the uh, above the national level, and this is one of the cases of globalization which is trying to operate and of course, when this is operating above the nation states, it is trying not only to, of course, the major role is to connect, but of course, in this case, it can also bring the rupture between the local and the international. Like that, there is a dominance of this. In some cases, it may happen or it may not. One of the negative aspects of globalization that the economic formation in this case, it can lead to the uh, to the inaccessibility, let's say, of the local to the international. Then the competitiveness becomes very limited in this case. So this is one of the manifestations of globalization. It is a globalization, which is of course brought through the transnational through transnationalism.
So transnationalism has to be more about connecting. So, okay, I think I got it. Okay, I'll read up on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Rose,
Yes,
anything else? Like, I don't know if anyone has
no,
something to
if
say.
anyone
Or
want to ask,
if you have anything to comment, it's not necessary. It has not to be only a question. You may comment something, you may not agree with something, so you are welcome. We have 2 minutes.
If you don't have anything, then we will meet next week for the classes.
Okay.
Okay. Because no one is asking or saying
Okay.
anything.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.